As Tony Soprano used to say on The Sopranos, this is our busy season. Was that from The Godfather? I think it was The Sopranos. Kind of feels a little mafioso-like, right? What we're about to embark upon. Tuesday is New Hampshire. Joey Hudson has been very busy. He was in Iowa the other day for the caucus, braving the frigid conditions. Now he's getting ready to head to New Hampshire. Nikki Haley is hoping to make a big dent in the apparent insurmountable lead of Donald Trump. I've been referring to an article that someone sent me from Time Magazine, Time.com, a history of Nikki Haley's biggest flip-flops on Trump. And people have been astounded by her actual track record when it comes to not only Trump, but things like illegal immigration, the Confederate flag in South Carolina, which is going to doom her chances, incidentally. Her removal of the Confederate flag from the state capitol grounds is what's going to keep her from even having a decent showing, probably, in the Palmetto State when it's time for their primary. She is now the plan B for a lot of people in the Republican Party orbit. Let's welcome to the show Joey Hudson, who's our correspondent at large and our 2024 election reporter. Have you thawed out yet from Iowa?
I think I've thawed out just in time to refreeze as I head to New Hampshire in a couple of days.
I mean, there's all kinds of weather alerts for that whole part of the country. I mean, heck, it's cold here in Florida. It's going to be in the 30s this weekend, and people are freaking out.
Yes, it wasn't too much warmer when I returned to South Carolina the other day. So, but hey, as you said, we're in busy time. So.
It is our busy season. You know, a new poll came out, the Boston Globe NBC poll came out of Boston. It shows Trump has expanded his lead against Nikki Haley. She's down a point. He went up a couple of points. I still have this hunch that she's going to perform better than expected in New Hampshire. Am I all wet?
Well, I think she does do much better in New Hampshire than she did in Iowa. A number of polls showing that. And, of course, the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, is traveling around the state with her. She has a good organization there. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis appears to have conceded New Hampshire to Haley. He's focusing more on South Carolina. So, yes, I do think we see a better performance, but do we see another 50% plus with Donald Trump in New Hampshire? If he does that, Mike, I don't think any candidate in our history has ever won Iowa and then New Hampshire with a 50+% of the vote.
All right, you know South Carolina better than anybody I know. You're a native South Carolinian. You've been actively involved with the law enforcement community there, with Crime Stoppers and the award-winning work you've done. Of course, you're the executive director of my foundation, Gallagher's Heroes, the Fallen Officer Fund, which prints first responders Bibles and assists families of officers killed in the line of duty. And you know Republican Party politics like the back of your hand in South Carolina. People don't quite understand the way South Carolinians feel about Nikki Haley. There's a lot of animosity towards her, frankly, and I believe it has a lot to do with the Confederate flag. That goes back to 2015. But can you kind of give us an overview of that whole chapter and why that continues to plague her to this day?
Well, for decades, the Confederate flag was an issue that the state legislature addressed every session. I mean, literally for 15, 20 years. At the time, it was flown on the dome of our state capitol in South Carolina. And the African-American community and some of the more liberal groups just hated the fact that we had the American flag, the South Carolina flag, and the Confederate flag above our Capitol. So that was a bill that was introduced every year for a couple of decades. So eventually the compromise was, okay, we'll take it off of the dome, but we're going to put it in a prominent place on the State House grounds because, there were a lot of South Carolinians that they look at that as our history, part of our history, which it is. So the compromise was, we're going to move it, and they did. They placed it in front of the Capitol with a fence around it, nicely displayed. Everybody was happy. That was a good compromise. You didn't hear about the Confederate flag anymore. Then, sadly, we had the horrible shooting in Charleston at Mother Emanuel, and Nikki Haley was our governor at the time. She called a special session of our legislature, brought them back into session, which is very rare, by the way. Just a few weeks after this horrible shooting is a very emotional time. She brought them back just for that topic, to remove the Confederate flag completely off of the grounds of the State House. She did, and to this day it remains in a museum in the Columbia, South Carolina area.
And it was, of course, the massacre of those poor churchgoers by that disgusting racist at Mother Emanuel Church that evidently led her to change her mind once again. But I've shared with everybody an article. We're going to post it at MikeOnline.com about Nikki Haley, Time.com, a history of Nikki Haley's biggest flip-flops on Trump. Now, this was written a little bit ago, before she was even officially a candidate. Over the last several years, before, during, and after taking a position in Trump's administration, the article says, she has flip-flopped on Trump multiple times, oscillating from criticizing him to praising him. For example, she was sharply critical of Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign. In 2015, she said, every time someone criticizes him, he goes and makes a political attack back. That's not who we are as Republicans. It's not what we do. And most importantly, listen to what she said about illegal immigration. Time.com reports she slammed his plan to build a border wall and his other positions on immigration. Republicans need to remember that the fabric of America came from these legal immigrants, she said. If you want to talk about tackling illegal immigration, let's talk about it, but we don't need to attack so many millions of people who came here and did it the right way, like my parents. Now, the article goes on to point out, when Trump called NATO obsolete, Nikki Haley said, I think NATO is an important alliance for us to have, and now we need more allies than ever. She said any comments the president-elect has made are his comments. Haley ultimately joined his administration. She resigned from the post. She got a glowing parting speech from Trump. She continued to put daylight between herself and Trump at times, but in her book, published that year, With All Due Respect, Defending America with Grit and Grace, she was all in, Joey. She lavished the president with praise. She explained that his strategy with Vladimir Putin was a maneuver intended to keep the line of communication open. She told NBC, in every instance I dealt with him, he was truthful, he listened, and he was great to work with. But finally, I think the most egregious broken promise was when she said, I would not run if President Trump ran, and I would talk to him about it. I mean, Joey, she pledged not to run for president if Trump was the nominee. This is what I hear from South Carolinians all the time, that Nikki Haley, quite bluntly, twists in the wind.
Yes. And let me tell you what I hear from our listeners and friends in South Carolina as well. I have several who constantly email and text me, and they call her Nikki the Quitter, because she resigned as her position as governor, did not complete that term to go to the UN, and then she resigned 2 years into the UN. So, a lot of people feel like, well, Nikki does not finish what she starts. But back to Trump, you do realize that Trump was her third choice, not her first choice. Marco Rubio was her first choice. When Marco Rubio did not do well, she then went to Senator Ted Cruz, and then finally arrived at the fact that, well, I guess I better get on board with Donald Trump, who ultimately appointed her to the UN.
All right, so give me your take. You're going to be in New Hampshire. You're leaving this weekend. You'll have great coverage, as you did from Iowa, with us here on the Mike Gallagher Show, also on Salem News Channel. I'm going to be anchoring our coverage beginning at 7 p.m. Tuesday night. My buddy Mark Davis, I think, is going to be anchoring at 6 p.m. Eastern, and then Andrew Wilkow at 8 p.m. You'll be appearing on all the shows and all of our platforms. If she does well in New Hampshire, that does sustain her for a period of time, does it not?
It does, because the word on the street is that some of her big donors have said, you've got to show up in New Hampshire or the money's going to dry up. So if she does, I think it allows her to survive and at least come to South Carolina. What happens after South Carolina, though? Because Mike, I don't see Nikki Haley doing very well in her home state of South Carolina.
And that's tough because if she finishes third, as is projected now, I don't know how she defends that. I don't know how you explain finishing third place in your own state. So we're going to be all over it. Joey Hudson, safe travels. You did get a heavier coat this time, right? I talked you out of the windbreaker, right?
Yes, I have a heavier coat. I'm ready. I'm ready for New Hampshire.
Get your boots on and buckle in because it's going to be a wild ride. Thanks, Joey. We'll check with you next week from New Hampshire. And let's check with you right now at 1-800-655-MIKE here in the Relief Factor Studios, 800-655-6453. I'm a little concerned about Nikki Haley's performance in New Hampshire because I suspect she'll do well. I could be completely 100% flat out wrong. If Trump gets over 50%, as this last poll suggests, and she's 15, 20 points behind, it's got to be over for her, right? And it's going to be Trump and only Trump. Do you agree with that or not? 800-655-6453. I hope you join us.